Welcome to this week's tutorial on how to paint a watercolor pumpkin for fall. In this tutorial, I'll show you how to use a few colors to create a simple but beautiful pumpkin that you can paint on a card to send in the mail or to gift a friend, or as you can see in the beginning of this video, I framed mine. I generally paint on 4" by 6" watercolor paper that I've cut down to size. So I hope you enjoy this tutorial. If you do like it, please be sure to subscribe so that you can see all of my weekly tutorials. To start with this pumpkin, I'm just using a darker yellow pigment here. I've got more water than pigment in this. This is the underlayer or the base of my pumpkin, and I've just created an oblong oval and I let it dry before I add the next step, which is going to the right side and to the left side and adding the different parts of this pumpkin, working my way out. So if you would like a longer pumpkin, you just make your sections longer, or if you want a plumper pumpkin, you can just make them rounder, and of course you can decide the different sizes that you prefer: small, medium, large, or a combination of all of them. And once you have this technique down, how to paint pumpkins, it's a lot easier to try a different variety of sizes. Now you're supposed to let these dry, these little sections of the pumpkin, before you go in to extend out from that center. Sometimes I get a little impatient and I might start painting before these sections are dry. If you like the blended look of the wet on wet, go ahead and don't let them fully dry and your colors will blend in a little bit. But if you want them to be crisp, where you see the different segments, just to make sure that you are patient and waiting for them to dry so that it doesn't bleed into the next section. With watercolor, it's usually best to start with the light tones as your base. You can see here I'm bleeding a little bit because it's not fully dry, and that's okay. I don't mind that. I like the organic look in watercolor and kind of the looseness of the paints blending there. But as I was saying, if you want to add depth to a watercolor painting, you start with light and then go to dark. So I will be using a couple of the oranges that you can see in my palette up there to create more dimension after I've gotten this darker yellow base. You could go a little bit lighter with the yellow. I'm actually just going to have a few little sections of the yellow peeking through on my pumpkin as I get to add more depth there. But for right now, I'm just establishing the base coat, letting it dry before I go to each section, and then I'll rinse my brush out, grab some of the orange, and that center section is already pretty dry. So I'm just going to go along the same outline of that section of pumpkin as I did before, and you can tell that I'm leaving some of the sections where the yellow can pop through. This is just by eye, just kind of what I like, what looks visually appealing to me. Most of us have pumpkins around in the fall that are real or faux, and you could grab them and see how the light plays on the different angles of the pumpkin and just try to figure out where you might like some of the light reflected on yours. The more that you paint, the better you'll get at just kind of eyeballing that and seeing what you like or don't like, because really it's up to you style and taste wise, because you are the artist, and the more pumpkins you paint, the better you'll get at it. So it's lots of fun to add these different dimensions here with the different oranges and yellows. You could start with a lighter yellow if you like, or use darker oranges than what I'm using. Sometimes if I want a darker color than what I have, I'll add a little bit of black to it, but I like these straight out of my palette. I think they look nice. I'm just going to fill in here and there. Again, if you don't want the bleeding, make sure that you let each section dry. I often do 2 or 3 paintings or cards at a time just so that I can keep moving, and while one is drying I can work on the next one here. You can tell that they're dry when you move them back and forth and they don't glisten. You can see in the upper part of that pumpkin it's still wet there because it's shiny. So sometimes I'll pick up my painting and move it around under the light to see how dry it is before I move on. I've changed over to a smaller round brush here just because these edges are a little bit more tight and I need more control over where I'm putting the pigment down. So don't forget to use different size brushes to see what you're comfortable with here. I contemplated on if I wanted to use shadowing in this or not, and I decided ultimately not to use any shadowing. When I do add shadows, I'll use a light gray and just kind of show the shape on the base of my paintings. But for this one, I've decided to let this dry and think about positioning the stem, trying to figure out which way is up here. You can kind of tell that it could go either way when I go to add my stem. So I'll just orient it so what looks the most natural. And I'll pick up some of my olive green here in a little bit after I add a few more little layers on detail wise. With watercoloring, the more layers the better, the more realistic a painting gets. Sometimes I like to keep it simple and light and airy, and other times I like to just keep layering on. Watercolor does dry lighter than what it appears when it's glossy like this, so do keep that in mind. Sometimes I'll walk away for 24 hours to see if I need to add any more details. Sometimes I just don't worry about that at all, and this is a very forgiving project, so if your shaping is kind of wonky, you can always go over it with darker pigments to make it maybe more round and plump if that's what you like, or if something looks uneven, you can go over it with more pigment, or even some water sometimes can smooth out some sharper edges that you might find that you don't like. So I'm just going over this a little bit to soften it. Now I'm adding the stem. I'm using, you could use a chocolate brown or a light brown. I'm going with an olive green here, and I'm just kind of outlining it. I do need to be careful as my paint is still pretty wet at the top there, and it could blend in. Again, sometimes I like that, sometimes I don't. It's entirely up to you, but just put your stem on top, have it go over some of the rounded edges on the top there, and then you can come out and curl a little stroke up here and go over that once or twice just in case it needs a little bit more pigment to make it darker. And I'm pretty pleased with this. It's a little off center. I'm okay with that. I'm just going to use this in my decor at home. I'm not selling this one. I like to have things pretty centered, but this is an IKEA, I think it was $3.99 frame. It does not have glass, it has plastic, which I like, because if it breaks or gets bumped off by my boys or our dog or whatever, nothing will cause a huge problem because it is plastic. And I'll show you here, I have to take out the little frame insert, and then there's a plastic sheen over this on both sides to protect it from getting scratched. So I'm going to pull both of those off here, and this makes this frame also lightweight, which I like as well, and I think it'll be easy to store if I decide not to use it for the next season. But once I get this protective covering off of this 4x6 inch frame, I'll just place that down and put the insert back in. That's going to frame my pumpkin nicely, and stick my completely dried project in. You want to make sure that your project is dry or it will smear on the glass or plastic of your frame. And then I'm going to just secure it down in here and put the back on. And this little frame is nice because you can position it in several different ways to hang it, or you can pop out the back there and it can set on a shelf, which is perfect for the way that I decided to display this in my own home. So I hope you like this project. I have several others available if you'd like to give them a try. It's always great to make your own home decor and change it up with each season, and my watercolor tutorials are a great way to do that. So see you in the next one.